The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Al Udeid Air Base like a blade through silk. Major Valentina Ghost Kowalski sat in the briefing room, her weathered leather flight jacket draped over shoulders that had carried more burden than her 28 years should have allowed. The other pilots called her the billionaire's daughter behind her back, their voices thick with the kind of contempt reserved for those they believed had bought their way into the cockpit, rather than earned it through blood and sacrifice. What they didn't know was that Valentina had spent the last 6 months listening to their whispered jokes, their casual dismissals, their assumption that her father's defense contracts had paved her path to the F-22 Raptor program. They saw the designer watch on her wrist, the Italian leather boots that cost more than most airmen made in a month, and they saw privilege. They missed the 3-inch scar along her left temple, the one she'd earned when her A-10 Warthog had taken shrapnel over Mosul, or the slight tremor in her right hand that only appeared when the weather turned cold, a permanent reminder of the ejection that had nearly killed her 2 years prior. The emergency klaxon began its haunting wail, transforming the base from sleepy routine into choreographed chaos. Through the briefing room's reinforced windows, she watched ground crews sprint toward the flight line like ants responding to a kicked hill. Fuel trucks rumbled to life, their diesel engines coughing black smoke into the desert air. The massive hangar doors began their mechanical groan, revealing the angular, predatory silhouettes of F-22 Raptors nestled in their climate-controlled caves. Commander Jake "Reaper" Morrison burst through the briefing room door, his face grim beneath his regulation buzz cut. Behind him trailed a team of Navy SEALs, their tactical gear still dusty from whatever operation had brought them racing back to base. Their leader, Lieutenant Commander Alex "Hammer" Rodriguez, moved with the fluid confidence of a man who had stared death in the face and made it blink first. "We've got a situation," Morrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of classified disasters. "Operation Nightfall has gone sideways. Our boys are pinned down 60 clicks northeast of here, and we need immediate air support." The SEAL commander's eyes swept the room, cataloging the assembled pilots with the calculating gaze of a predator selecting prey. His attention lingered on Captain Rick "Thunder" Hayes, the squadron's golden boy, then moved to Major Tom "Viper" Chen, whose kill count was legendary among the fighter community. When his gaze reached Valentina, it slid past her like water off glass, dismissing her presence as thoroughly as if she'd been furniture. Ghost smiled. It was a cold expression, sharp enough to cut diamond. The mission briefing unfolded like a nightmare wrapped in tactical jargon. 12 Navy SEALs had been conducting a high-value target extraction when their intelligence had proved catastrophically wrong. Instead of finding a mid-level arms dealer in a compound 30 miles from the Syrian border, they'd walked into a hornet's nest of Russian Wagner Group mercenaries and Syrian Republican Guard forces. The extraction had become a running firefight that stretched across 12 miles of hostile territory. Their holdup in a shepherd's hut on grid reference 780-1549, Commander Morrison continued, manipulating the holographic display that dominated the briefing room's far wall. The three-dimensional terrain model rotated slowly, revealing the cruel geography that had trapped the SEALs. Rocky outcroppings provided cover but also limited escape routes. A dried riverbed offered concealment but channeled movement into predictable patterns. Enemy forces have them surrounded. Estimated 40 hostiles with heavy weapons, including at least 2 Russian-made ZSU-23 anti-aircraft systems. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez stepped forward, his jaw tight with the kind of controlled fury that came from watching good men die. "My boys have been under fire for 3 hours. They're running low on ammunition, and Petty Officer Martinez took shrapnel in the leg. We need those fighters airborne in 15 minutes, or we're going to be shipping bodies home instead of heroes." Thunder Hayes leaned forward in his chair, already mentally calculating flight paths and weapons loadouts. His confidence filled the room like cologne, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. "Sir, give me 2 birds and clean rules of engagement. I can have your seals extracted within the hour." Viper Chen nodded his agreement, his fingers drumming against his kneeboard with the impatience of a thoroughbred waiting for the starting gate. F-22s can punch through their air defenses like tissue paper. We put a couple of JDAMs on those ZSU positions, then provide close air support while the extraction birds move in. The SEAL commander studied the 2 pilots with the intensity of a man whose soldiers' lives hung in the balance. Both men radiated competence, their flight suits adorned with patches that told stories of successful missions and confirmed kills. These were the pilots he wanted, the ones whose reputations preceded them into every briefing room and bar from Nevada to Afghanistan. Ghost remained silent, her presence as overlooked as shadows at noon. She'd learned years ago that in rooms full of testosterone and ego, patience was often more valuable than volume. Her father had taught her that lesson during countless boardroom battles, watching corporate predators devour each other while she sat quietly in the corner, absorbing strategies that would later prove invaluable in combat situations. The mission parameters continued to unfold with bureaucratic precision. Weather conditions were deteriorating, with sandstorms expected to reduce visibility within the next 2 hours. Enemy reinforcements were en route from Damascus, including mobile surface-to-air missile systems that would complicate any rescue attempt. Time was bleeding away like hydraulic fluid from a damaged aircraft, each passing minute reducing the chances of bringing those SEALs home alive. Commander Morrison assigned aircraft with the detached efficiency of a chess master moving pieces across a board. Thunder Haze would take the lead F-22, call sign Raptor 1. Viper Chen would fly wing position as Raptor 2. Together, they would penetrate enemy airspace, eliminate the anti-aircraft threats, and provide close air support until extraction helicopters could reach the trapped SEALs. Ghost felt the familiar sting of exclusion, the bitter taste of being judged unworthy before she'd even been given the chance to prove herself. It was a sensation she'd grown accustomed to, like an old injury that ached before storms. Her flight suit bore the same patches as her male counterparts, her wings gleaming with the same gold finish, but somehow she remained invisible when the real missions were handed out. The briefing concluded with military efficiency, officers dispersing to their respective preparations like actors rushing to costume changes between scenes. Thunder and Viper headed toward the equipment lockers, their conversation already focused on weapon selections and ingress routes. The SEAL team gathered around their commander, checking equipment and synchronizing watches with the precision of men who understood that timing often meant the difference between success and disaster. Ghost remained seated, her fingers tracing the outline of a photograph tucked inside her flight suit pocket. The image showed her younger brother Tommy, his face bright with the kind of innocence that only exists before the world teaches you how cruel it can be. He died in a car accident 3 years ago, his dreams of becoming a Marine pilot buried alongside him in Arlington National Cemetery. Every mission she flew, every risk she took, carried the weight of his unfulfilled aspirations. The hangar bay erupted with controlled chaos as ground crews prepared the F-22 Raptors for combat. These weren't just aircraft, they were apex predators of the sky, each one representing billions of dollars in research, development, and technological superiority. Their angular surfaces deflected radar waves like mirrors redirecting light, making them nearly invisible to enemy detection systems. Twin Pratt & Whitney F-119 engines provided thrust vectoring capabilities that allowed impossible maneuvers, turning the laws of physics into mere suggestions. Fuel trucks positioned themselves with mechanical precision, their pumps feeding aviation gasoline into the Raptor's tanks with the urgency of blood transfusions. Weapons technicians loaded AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles into internal bays, each projectile capable of engaging targets beyond visual range with lethal accuracy. The 20 M61A2 Vulcan cannon received its allocation of armor-piercing rounds, 6,000 bullets that could shred enemy aircraft like paper in a hurricane. Thunder Haze emerged from the equipment locker transformed, his flight suit now accessorized with survival gear, communications equipment, and the kind of swagger that came from knowing you were about to climb into one of the most advanced weapons systems ever created. His helmet bore custom artwork, a skull wearing aviator sunglasses, surrounded by lightning bolts that spelled out his call sign in jagged letters. It was the kind of ostentatious display that Ghost found both juvenile and strangely endearing. Viper Chen's preparation ritual was more subdued but equally thorough. He checked each piece of equipment twice, his movements economical and practiced. His helmet was unmarked except for regulation identifiers, its surface as smooth and professional as the man who wore it. Where Thunder relied on natural talent amplified by confidence, Viper embodied the methodical precision of a surgeon or a sniper, both professions that demanded perfection on the first attempt. The two pilots walked toward their aircraft with the measured pace of gunfighters approaching high noon. Ground crews scattered from their path like leaves before wind, everyone understanding that these men were about to risk their lives to save others. The weight of responsibility settled around them like invisible armor, transforming routine pre-flight procedures into sacred rituals. Ghost watched from the observation deck, her hands pressed against the reinforced glass that separated her from the action. Below, hydraulic systems whined as F-22 canopies opened like the jaws of mechanical predators. Pilots settled into cockpits that had been designed around the human form, every switch and display positioned for maximum efficiency during high-stress combat situations. Engines began their startup sequences, twin afterburners painting the hangar walls with dancing shadows as turbofans spun toward operational speed. The radio chatter began immediately, pilots and ground control coordinating the complex ballet required to launch combat aircraft. Each transmission was crisp and professional, layers of training and experience distilled into essential communication. Ghost knew every callout, every procedure, every backup protocol that governed F-22 operations. She'd memorized technical manuals that most pilots skimmed, studying them with the obsessive attention to detail that had once helped her father build a defense contracting empire from a garage startup. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez stood beside the runway, his tactical radio pressed against his ear as he received updates from his trapped team. Each transmission brought fresh urgency, reports of ammunition running low and enemy forces massing for what appeared to be a final assault. His face remained professionally composed, but Ghost could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand clenched and unclenched around the grip of his sidearm. The F-22s taxied toward the runway with predatory grace, their movement more akin to stalking than mere transportation. Navigation lights strobed against the pre-dawn darkness, red and green beacons that marked the passage of America's technological superiority. Tower control issued final clearances, weather updates, and intelligence briefings that would guide the pilots through hostile airspace toward their destination. Thunder Haze's voice crackled through the communications system, confidence radiating through every syllable. "Tower, Raptor 1 ready for departure. We'll have your boys home for breakfast." His transmission carried the casual arrogance of a man who had never failed at anything important, whose entire career had been a steady progression of victories and commendations. Ghost felt something cold settle in her stomach, a premonition born from too many years watching confident pilots make catastrophic mistakes. She'd seen Thunder's type before, naturally gifted aviators whose success had bred a dangerous kind of carelessness. They flew like gods until the moment reality reminded them they were merely human, and by then it was often too late for anyone to survive the lesson. The afterburners ignited with controlled explosions of force, twin pillars of fire that transformed fuel into forward motion with violent efficiency. F-22 Raptors accelerated down the runway like bullets fired from the barrel of some cosmic rifle, their passage marking the air with heat distortions and sonic pressure waves. Within seconds, they achieved rotation speed and lifted into the dark sky, their navigation lights disappearing into the vast emptiness above the desert. Ghost remained at the observation window long after the aircraft had vanished, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. Somewhere in the darkness, 12 Navy SEALs waited for salvation that might never come. Two of the Air Force's finest pilots raced toward a confrontation with an enemy that had already proven capable of turning routine missions into disasters. And she stood watching, her skills and experience deemed insufficient for the challenges that lay ahead. The communications center buzzed with controlled activity as operators tracked the F-22's progress toward their target area. Digital displays showed aircraft positions, weather patterns, and enemy force dispositions with clinical precision. Each update painted a clearer picture of the tactical situation, and none of it looked encouraging. The SEALs were outnumbered 4-1, trapped in terrain that offered limited escape routes, facing an enemy that had apparently been expecting their arrival. Commander Morrison paced behind the communications operators like a caged predator, his attention focused on radio transmissions that carried life-or-death implications. Every few minutes, he received updates from the trapped SEAL team, each report more desperate than the last. Ammunition was running critically low. Petty Officer Martinez's wound was worse than initially reported. Enemy forces were massing for what appeared to be a coordinated assault designed to overrun the American position. Ghost found herself studying the tactical display with the kind of focused intensity she usually reserved for complex flight manuals. The terrain was challenging, rocky outcroppings that provided cover, but also channeled movement into predictable patterns. The enemy had positioned their anti-aircraft systems with professional competence, creating overlapping fields of fire that would challenge even the most advanced stealth aircraft. It was the kind of tactical situation that required not just skill and technology, but also intuition and adaptability. The first indication that something had gone wrong came 43 minutes after takeoff. Thunder Hayes' voice, usually radiating unshakable confidence, carried a subtle note of confusion. "Control, Raptor 1. We're not seeing the enemy positions at the briefed coordinates. Thermal imaging shows scattered heat signatures, but nothing consistent with a major force concentration." Viper Chen's response followed immediately, his tone more measured but equally puzzled. "Raptor 2 confirms. Grid reference 780-1549 shows minimal enemy activity. Either our intelligence was wrong, or they've displaced since the briefing." The communications center fell silent except for the steady hum of electronic equipment. Commander Morrison stepped closer to the radio operator, his face grim with the realization that missions rarely went according to plan. Intelligence failures were common in combat zones, but timing this poor suggested something more sinister than simple miscommunication. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez grabbed a headset, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Raptor Flight, this is Ground Team Actual. My boys are taking heavy fire at grid reference 780-5552, not 780-1549. Somebody fucked up the coordinates, and my people are dying because of it." The correction hit the communications center like a physical blow. 4 kilometers might seem insignificant on a map, but in combat terms, it represented the difference between salvation and disaster. The F-22s were searching for enemies in empty desert while Navy SEALs fought for their lives miles away, their ammunition running low and their options disappearing with each passing minute. Ghost felt her training and experience crystallize into sudden, terrible clarity. She'd seen coordinate errors before, had personally experienced the confusion that resulted when intelligence reports conflicted with ground truth. The solution was obvious to anyone who understood both air-to-ground operations and the limitations of pre-planned mission parameters. But the pilots currently airborne were operating under the assumption that their briefing had been accurate, and that assumption was about to get good men killed. Thunder Haze acknowledged the coordinate correction with the kind of professional calm that masked rising panic. Copy that, ground team. Raptor flight is redirecting to grid reference 780 5552. ETA approximately 8 minutes. His transmission carried none of his earlier confidence, replaced by the focused intensity of a pilot who had suddenly realized that everything he thought he knew might be wrong. The tactical display updated to show the F-22's new flight path, their course correction taking them over terrain that hadn't been included in the original mission briefing. Satellite imagery revealed a landscape that was significantly more challenging than their initial target area: deeper valleys, steeper ridgelines, and vegetation patterns that provided excellent camouflage for enemy forces. It was exactly the kind of environment where even advanced aircraft could find themselves vulnerable to well-positioned ground threats. Ghost made her decision with the swift certainty of someone who had learned to trust her instincts over institutional hierarchy. She turned away from the observation window and walked toward the equipment lockers, her movement purposeful and direct. Behind her, radio transmissions continued to paint an increasingly desperate picture of the tactical situation, but she was no longer listening to words. She was responding to something deeper, the call of duty that transcended rank structures and gender biases. Her flight suit hung exactly where she had left it 6 hours earlier, the fabric still carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and recycled cockpit air. Each piece of equipment had its designated place, arranged with the obsessive attention to detail that separated professional aviators from merely competent ones. Helmet, oxygen mask, survival radio, emergency beacon, sidearm. Every item inspected, tested, and positioned for maximum accessibility during high-stress situations. The weapons technicians initially resisted her presence, their training emphasizing chain of command and proper authorization procedures. But Ghost had learned long ago that confidence could overcome bureaucracy, especially when lives hung in the balance. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who belonged exactly where she was, and gradually the ground crew began responding to her requests with the automatic compliance that military personnel displayed toward legitimate authority. F-22 tail number 54087 sat in the hangar like a sleeping predator, its angular surfaces reflecting LED work lights in patterns that seemed almost organic. This particular aircraft had been her assigned bird for the past 8 months, its systems and quirks as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She knew that the left engine ran slightly hotter than specifications during high-G maneuvers. She understood that the radar system required a 2-second warm-up period that wasn't mentioned in official documentation. Most importantly, she recognized that this machine represented the pinnacle of American aerospace engineering, and she was one of only a handful of people on Earth qualified to unleash its full potential. The pre-flight inspection proceeded with mechanical precision, each step of the checklist performed exactly as regulation demanded. Control surfaces moved through their full range of motion. Engine intakes were clear of foreign object debris. Weapons systems showed green across all indicators. The aircraft was mission-ready, waiting only for authorization that might never come through proper channels. Ghost sealed herself into the cockpit with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual hundreds of times before. The canopy closed with a satisfying thunk, creating the pressurized environment that would sustain her life at altitudes where the sky turned black and the earth curved away beneath her wings. Engine startup sequences initiated automatically, twin Pratt and Whitney power plants spinning toward operational parameters with the smooth precision of Swiss timepieces. The radio crackled with increasing desperation from the battlefield. Thunder and Viper had reached the corrected coordinates, but their situation reports painted a picture of tactical complexity that exceeded their original mission parameters. Enemy forces were dispersed across multiple positions, making target identification difficult without risking friendly fire incidents. The trapped SEALs were running critically low on ammunition, and enemy reinforcements were reportedly en route from multiple directions. Commander Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter with command authority. Raptor Flight, be advised that weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. You have approximately 30 minutes before sandstorm activity forces a mission abort. His transmission carried the weight of impossible choices. Continue the rescue attempt under increasingly dangerous conditions, or abandon 12 Navy SEALs to capture or death. Ghost keyed her radio with the calm professionalism that had carried her through 3 combat deployments. Tower, Ghost requesting immediate departure clearance. I'm launching to provide backup support for Raptor Flight. Her transmission was matter-of-fact, containing no acknowledgement of the fact that she was effectively stealing a $100 million aircraft without proper authorization. The tower's response came after a pause that lasted several heartbeats. Ghost, you are not authorized for this mission. Return to quarters immediately. The air traffic controller's voice carried confusion rather than anger, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez stepped closer to the radio operator, his expression shifting from desperation to something approaching hope. Tower, this is ground team actual. I don't care who's flying that bird. My boys need help, and they need it now. Clear Ghost for immediate departure. The hangar bay erupted in controlled chaos as ground crews realized what was happening. Some moved to support Ghost's unauthorized launch, while others looked around uncertainly for someone with sufficient authority to stop her. The conflict between following regulations and saving lives played out in real time, each person forced to choose between institutional loyalty and moral obligation. Ghost didn't wait for official clearance. She advanced the throttles with smooth precision, feeling 22,000 pounds of thrust push her aircraft toward the hangar exit. The F-22 moved with predatory grace, its movement more akin to prowling than taxiing. Navigation lights strobed against the concrete walls, painting shifting patterns of red and green that marked the passage of barely controlled lethality. The runway stretched before her like a pathway to either redemption or court-martial. Weather conditions were indeed deteriorating, with wind gusts that would challenge even experienced pilots. But Ghost had flown in worse conditions, had landed damaged aircraft in crosswinds that would have grounded lesser aviators. This was what she had trained for, what every hour of flight time and every simulated emergency had prepared her to accomplish. Her radio crackled with transmissions from the battlefield, each update more desperate than the last. Thunder Haze and Viper Chen were engaging multiple enemy positions, their weapons systems pushed to maximum effectiveness against targets that seemed to multiply faster than they could be eliminated. The trapped SEALs were down to their last magazines, their defensive perimeter shrinking with each enemy assault. Ghost felt the familiar transformation that occurred when training merged with necessity, when theoretical knowledge became life-or-death application. Her breathing slowed to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. Her vision narrowed to focus only on essential information. The civilian world fell away, replaced by the crystalline clarity that separated professional warriors from everyone else who merely wore uniforms. The afterburners ignited with controlled violence, twin pillars of fire that transformed fuel into forward motion with thermodynamic efficiency. Acceleration pressed her deep into the ejection seat as the F-22 achieved rotation speed and lifted into the storm-dark sky. Within seconds, she was climbing through weather that would have kept commercial aviation grounded, her aircraft's advanced systems cutting through turbulence like a blade through silk. Below her, Al Udeid Air Base shrank to a collection of geometric shapes scattered across the desert floor. Above, the sky opened into vast darkness punctuated by stars that seemed close enough to touch. And ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, 12 Navy SEALs waited for salvation that she might or might not be able to provide. The tactical radio frequencies buzzed with the controlled chaos of combat operations. Thunder Haze was coordinating strikes against enemy positions, while Viper Chen provided reconnaissance and target identification. Their professional competence was evident in every transmission, but Ghost could hear the subtle signs of stress that indicated they were being pushed beyond their comfort zones. Control, Raptor 1. We're engaging multiple ZSU positions, but they're using the terrain to mask their signatures. Every time we eliminate one target, two more seem to pop up in different locations. Thunder's voice carried the frustration of a pilot accustomed to technological superiority finding himself in a fair fight. Viper Chen's response was characteristically precise. Raptor 2 concurs. Enemy forces are displaying tactical sophistication that exceeds our intelligence estimates. They're coordinating their movements and using advanced camouflage techniques. This isn't militia-level opposition. Ghost absorbed the battlefield information while climbing toward her operational altitude, her mind automatically processing tactical implications and potential solutions. The enemy's behavior suggested professional military training, possibly Russian or Iranian advisors providing strategic guidance to Syrian forces. Such opposition would require different tactics than the standard air-to-ground operations that American pilots had grown accustomed to fighting against less sophisticated adversaries. Her radar systems came online with electronic precision, painting the airspace around her with invisible energy that could detect hostile aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles. The scope remained clear except for the friendly contacts representing Thunder and Viper, their F-22s showing as blue symbols against the green background of her tactical display. But Ghost had learned to distrust empty radar screens, knowing that advanced enemies possessed jamming capabilities that could create false impressions of safety. The weather conditions continued to deteriorate as she approached the combat area, sandstorms reducing visibility to near-zero levels. Such conditions would normally force mission termination, but the trapped SEALs didn't have the luxury of waiting for better weather. Ghost adjusted her flight path to compensate for turbulence that threatened to tear her aircraft apart, relying on instruments and training to navigate through atmosphere that had become actively hostile to human flight. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter with barely controlled desperation. "Any station, this is Ground Team Actual. We are down to final magazines and requesting immediate extraction. Enemy forces are massing for what appears to be a final assault. We need those birds overhead now, or we're not going to make it to sunrise." The transmission hit Ghost with physical force, each word carrying the weight of impending disaster. She had heard similar calls before, had responded to desperate pleas from soldiers who found themselves abandoned by circumstances and failed by intelligence. Some of those calls had ended well, with successful rescues and grateful survivors. Others had resulted in body bags and folded flags presented to grieving families. She keyed her radio with the calm professionalism that masked rising determination. "Ground Team Actual, Ghost inbound to your position. ETA 4 minutes. Transmit your exact coordinates and mark friendly positions with IR strobes." Her voice carried none of the uncertainty that had characterized the earlier transmissions from Thunder and Viper, replaced by the focused intensity of someone who had found her element. The battlefield emerged from the sandstorm like a vision from hell, revealed in the infrared signatures that painted her tactical display with thermal contrasts. Enemy vehicles showed as bright spots against the cooler desert floor, their engines and exhaust systems creating heat signatures that advanced targeting systems could identify and prioritize. The trapped SEALs appeared as a tight cluster of human-shaped thermal images, their defensive perimeter marked by the scattered heat signatures of expended ammunition and abandoned equipment. Ghost's first target presented itself with textbook clarity, a ZSU-23 anti-aircraft system positioned on a ridgeline that provided excellent fields of fire against approaching aircraft. The enemy crew had chosen their position with professional competence, but they had not anticipated facing an opponent who understood both their capabilities and their limitations. Her targeting systems locked onto the heat signature of the vehicle's engine block, painting it with invisible laser energy that would guide her weapons to their destination. The AGM-88 HARM missile departed her weapons bay with electronic precision, its seeker head immediately acquiring the radiation signature of the enemy's fire control radar. The weapon accelerated to 3 times the speed of sound, covering the distance to its target faster than human reflexes could respond. The explosion that followed lit up the night sky like artificial lightning, vaporizing the anti-aircraft system and eliminating one threat from the tactical equation. Thunder Hayes' voice crackled through her headset, carrying surprise mixed with something that might have been respect. "Ghost, where the hell did you come from? That was a beautiful shot." His transmission marked the first time any of her squadron mates had acknowledged her presence with anything approaching admiration. But Ghost was already selecting her next target, her training and experience merging into the kind of focused lethality that separated elite pilots from merely competent ones. A second ZSU position revealed itself through muzzle flashes as its crew opened fire on Thunder's F-22, their tracers painting geometric patterns against the dark sky. She rolled into an attack run that would have been impossible for less advanced aircraft, her thrust-vectoring nozzles allowing maneuvers that defied conventional aerodynamics. The 20 cannon rounds departed her aircraft at 6,000 rounds per minute, each projectile guided by fire control computers that calculated trajectory, wind drift, and target movement with mathematical precision. The armor-piercing bullets struck the enemy vehicle like metallic rain, penetrating steel armor and finding the ammunition stored within. The secondary explosion was larger than the first, suggesting that she had eliminated not just an anti-aircraft system, but also a significant portion of the enemy's munition supply. Viper Chen's radio transmission carried professional appreciation. "Ghost, you're making this look easy. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" His question suggested genuine curiosity rather than the dismissive mockery that had characterized most of her interactions with fellow pilots. The answer was complicated, rooted in hundreds of hours of simulator training and live-fire exercises that her father's connections had made possible. While other pilots had relied on standard military training programs, Ghost had supplemented her education with private instruction from retired combat veterans who understood tactics that weren't taught in official curriculums. She had studied enemy capabilities with the obsessive attention to detail that most people reserved for hobbies, memorizing technical specifications and operational procedures until they became as familiar as her own reflection. But there was no time for explanations or personal history lessons. The battlefield continued to evolve with deadly fluidity, enemy forces adapting to American air superiority with the kind of tactical flexibility that suggested professional military training rather than hastily organized resistance. New targets appeared on her thermal imaging system, including what appeared to be a mobile command post that was coordinating enemy movements with dangerous effectiveness. Ghost rolled into another attack run, her aircraft dancing through three-dimensional space with the grace of a predator that had found its natural hunting ground. The desert floor rushed past below her at 500 miles per hour, terrain features blurring into abstract patterns of heat and shadow. Her targeting systems painted multiple enemy positions with electronic precision, each potential target evaluated and prioritized according to threat level and tactical importance. The mobile command vehicle tried to escape her attention by moving between rock outcroppings that provided natural camouflage, but thermal imaging revealed the heat signatures of its engine and electronics. Ghost selected a GPS-guided bomb from her weapons inventory, programming the weapon's navigation system with coordinates that would place the explosion precisely where mathematics predicted the enemy vehicle would be when the weapon arrived. The GBU-39 small-diameter bomb fell through the night sky like a technological meteor, its guidance systems making minute adjustments to ensure accuracy that approached the realm of science fiction. The explosion, when it came, was relatively small but devastatingly precise. The enemy command post simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater that glowed white-hot in her infrared vision. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez's voice carried the first note of hope that Ghost had heard since the mission began. "Outstanding work, Ghost. Enemy fire is slacking off significantly. You just took out their command and control element." His transmission suggested that the tactical situation was finally shifting in favor of the trapped American forces. But Ghost knew that combat operations rarely concluded with single decisive actions. Enemy forces would adapt to the loss of their command structure, either by implementing pre-planned contingencies or by fragmenting into smaller units that would be harder to detect and engage. She needed to maintain pressure while the advantage remained on her side, using speed and precision to prevent the enemy from regrouping and launching another coordinated assault. Her radar warning system chirped with electronic urgency, indicating that she had attracted the attention of an advanced surface-to-air missile system that hadn't been included in the original intelligence briefing. The Russian-made S-300 was a formidable opponent, capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously at ranges that exceeded most aircraft's ability to respond. Its acquisition radar was already painting her F-22 with energy that felt like invisible fingers probing for weaknesses. Ghost responded with the kind of calm professionalism that came from understanding both her aircraft's capabilities and its limitations. She deployed chaff and flares while simultaneously changing course and altitude, creating multiple false targets that would confuse the enemy's guidance systems. Her electronic warfare suite began jamming the missile system's frequencies, filling the electromagnetic spectrum with noise that made target acquisition significantly more difficult. The SA-10 missiles launched with trails of fire that turned night into temporary day, their solid-fuel motors accelerating the weapons to speeds that challenged human comprehension. But Ghost had trained for exactly this scenario, had practiced defensive maneuvers in simulators that could replicate the stress and confusion of being targeted by advanced weapons systems. She rolled her F-22 into a series of high-G turns that would have been impossible for conventional aircraft, using thrust-vectoring nozzles to change direction faster than the missile's guidance systems could adapt. The first missile detonated harmlessly several hundred meters behind her aircraft, its proximity fuse triggered by chaff that had created a false radar signature. The second weapon flew past her position and self-destructed when its fuel ran out, leaving a brief fireball that illuminated the desert landscape below. Ghost had survived her first encounter with advanced enemy air defenses, but she understood that future engagements would be even more challenging as the enemy learned from their initial failure. Thunder Haze and Viper Chen had used her distraction to eliminate several more enemy positions, their coordinated attacks reducing the threat to the trapped SEALs, while Ghost dealt with the surface-to-air missiles. Their tactics were improving as they adapted to the tactical situation, their initial confidence replaced by the kind of focused competence that characterized elite military units operating under extreme pressure. The radio crackled with a transmission from the SEAL team that sent adrenaline surging through Ghost's bloodstream. "Air support, this is ground team actual. We have enemy reinforcements approaching from the northeast, estimated company strength with armored vehicles. We need immediate assistance or we're going to be overrun." Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez's voice carried the controlled desperation of a professional warrior who understood that his options had just been drastically reduced. Ghost's tactical display updated to show the new threat, thermal signatures, revealing a convoy of vehicles moving across the desert with the organized precision of a military unit, rather than the random movement of irregular forces. The lead vehicles appeared to be Russian-made BTR-82A armored personnel carriers, their 30mm autocannons and heavy machine guns capable of devastating the American ground team's light defensive positions. She made her decision with the swift certainty of someone who had learned to trust combat instincts over institutional procedures. Ground Team, Ghost engaging enemy reinforcements. Danger close fire support inbound. Mark your positions with IR strobes and keep your heads down. Her transmission was calm and professional, betraying none of the excitement that came from finally being allowed to demonstrate her full capabilities. The attack run required flying lower than safety regulations recommended, her F-22 skimming across the desert floor at an altitude that left no margin for error. Enemy small arms fire reached up toward her aircraft like deadly fireworks, tracers creating geometric patterns against the night sky. But Ghost was in her element now, operating at the intersection of technology and human skill, where only the most elite pilots could function effectively. Her 20 cannon engaged the lead BTR with devastating precision, armor-piercing rounds penetrating the vehicle's hull and finding the ammunition stored within. The explosion was spectacular,